This is the 13th in a series of programs I'm doing on wisdom and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. The last program I did dealt with the question, what might be a wise person's attitude towards other people? This program will provide a continuation on that theme and also will provide some additional ideas and information. First, a brief review of the last program. Confucius sets the tone for many subsequent philosophers on the issue of wisdom and what might be a wise person's attitude towards other people. Confucius believed that wisdom involves practicing the golden rule. He phrased it this way: do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. But also he added that if one is going to practice wisdom towards other people, it's indispensable that one have an understanding of human nature. And he believed that we cannot interact well with other people if we don't have this understanding. An analogy would be to a computer. If one understands very well how to use a computer, it's far less frustrating using it. However, if one is pretty ignorant about how to operate a computer, it will probably be a very frustrating experience to use it. Well, so too with other people. If we understand other people pretty well, if we understand human nature pretty well, it's going to facilitate our efforts in dealing with other people. Let me provide a brief overview, as I did last week, of what some of the famous thinkers have said about human nature. And again, this will be a brief overview because last week I provided more details, and I also indicated that I will be doing a future series of programs on human nature and what the great thinkers have said about it. But right now, just a brief overview. Sigmund Freud claimed that human beings are by nature quite complicated. He also said we are ambivalent creatures. He pointed out that we human beings can love and hate the same person. He also maintained that we are often unconscious, for example, of our own behavior and motivations, and that we are deniers and repressors. Freud believed that we often hide truths about ourselves from ourselves. Freud also contended that human beings are often irrational. Shakespeare also addressed himself to the theme of irrationality in human nature when he has King Lear, in a despairing declaration, say the following: when we are born, we cry that we have come to this great stage of fools. Blaise Pascal, very devout Catholic, and Carl Jung, very famous psychoanalyst, both commented on how complicated we human beings are. Pascal put it this way. He said, there are two natures in us, the one good, the other bad. And psychiatrist Jung said this: the self is a union of opposites. The individual is confronted with the abysmal contradictions of human nature. For in the self, good and evil are indeed closer than identical twins. Psychiatrist Alfred Adler commented on the prevalence of feelings of inferiority and insecurity in people, which he claimed lead to people striving for power, superiority, and social status. Here are Adler's own words: the goal of superiority, of power, of the conquest of others is the goal which directs the activity of most human beings. Arthur Schopenhauer, famous German philosopher, commented on the human propensity for mask wearing. He said this, and I'm quoting him: we all wear a mask and play a role. And psychiatrist M. Scott Peck, picking up on Schopenhauer's idea, phrased it this way: most people opt for lives of very limited openness and honesty and relative closeness, hiding themselves from the world. Benedict Spinoza, the most famous of Dutch philosophers, talked about a characteristic many human beings might not like to face up to, and that's the human propensity for envy. Spinoza claimed that human beings are naturally envious creatures. Again, here are his own words. People are naturally envious. This means they are prone to rejoice at the failure of others and to be upset by their successes. So far, what I've said about human nature sounds quite pessimistic. Is there any cause for optimism? Well, I think there is. You recall, Blaise Pascal said that we have two natures, one bad, but one good. The idea is we are capable of compassion. We are capable of love. We are capable of service to our fellow human beings. We must also remember that human beings are products of their genes and their environment. Perhaps it was the latter Jesus was talking about when he said this: do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Both Jesus and Buddha emphasized compassion and how important it is that we bring a compassionate attitude to our relationships with other people. And of course, both believed the reason, or at least one of the reasons, we should have compassion towards other people is that life is difficult for everyone. Suffering is universal. No one gets out of this life without doing some significant suffering. Longshoreman philosopher Eric Hoffer said the most interesting things about compassion I've ever read, and let me give you a quote from him, which I think is quite provocative. He says this, and I'm quoting him: compassion alone stands apart from the continuous traffic between good and evil proceeding within us. Compassion is the antitoxin of the soul. Where there is compassion, even the most poisonous impulses in us remain relatively harmless. Again, Hoffer contended that compassion is the antitoxin of the soul. Philosopher Francis Bacon raised this question: can one be too kind? Can one be too gentle? He says yes, and for this reason. Philosopher Francis Bacon maintained that if we are too gentle and too sweet, that some other people will be prone to take advantage of us because of those very positive traits. Well, according to Bacon, what's the solution? Well, he says this. Francis Bacon says we human beings should not disarm ourselves by too much sweetness and good nature. And he says at least occasionally it's very important for us to assert ourselves, and that if we are dealing with people who are likely to take advantage of us or other people because of our decency or their decency, it's a good idea that our assertion have some sting to it. That's his word, sting. He says there are times when we must assert ourselves, especially with those who would take advantage of us. In my own experience, I have found that if I find that someone is taking advantage of me or taking advantage of someone else, I will tell them that, in my opinion, they're engaging in happiness stealing. Also, I like to convey to other people, if I think they're mistreating someone, including myself, that I think it's unmanly, it's unladylike to take advantage of someone's gentleness, to take advantage of someone's decency. Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius also advises us to be prepared for others' objectionable behavior. And before I convey Marcus Aurelius' advice to you, let me give you a little background on him. Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic philosopher of antiquity, And one of the reasons he's so famous is not only because he wrote a very interesting, thought-provoking book called Meditations, which was really based on his diary or journal, as some people would say, but he's also famous because he was an outstanding Roman emperor. That's right, Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. Indeed, some historians believe he was the best of all the Roman emperors. Indeed, some people claim that the idea of Plato's philosopher king was realized in Marcus Aurelius. I mentioned before his famous book, which you can buy at any good bookstore. Again, it's entitled Meditations. In this book, he offers this advice, and let's see what you think about it. He says this: begin each day by telling yourself, today I will be meeting with interference, ingratitude, selfishness, and ill will, all of them due to the offender's ignorance. Again, begin each day by telling yourself, today I will be meeting with ingratitude, interference, selfishness, and ill will. Sounds like the emperor might have had a bad day when he wrote those words. What do you think of his advice? He does indicate that there is a connection between evil and ignorance. He claims that so often people don't understand that when they hurt others, they're hurting themselves. Indeed, in his book, again entitled Meditations, Marcus Aurelius says that one of the things he often did when he thought somebody was treating him unfairly or treating another person unfairly was to take that person aside and to point out to that person that when one treats someone else unjustly, one is hurting oneself as well as possibly another individual. The Jesuit priest John Powell provides an attempt at explaining the degree of unselfishness in the world, the degree of lack of love in the world. And he says this. Father Powell says that many people are so overwhelmed with their own daily problems that they can't get much out of themselves to love other people. You must understand, Father Powell is not making excuses for people being selfish and displaying an unloving attitude towards other people. He's just trying to explain why some people might be rather selfish and unloving. And Father Powell, like Marcus Aurelius, believes that too much self-absorption results in a very unfulfilling life. There is a consensus among the famous thinkers that we should take time each day to be away from people, to be alone. Indeed, all the major religions emphasize the importance of solitude and silence. Writer Andy Rooney put it this way. He said, we need other people, but we also need to get away from other people. He went on to say, we need conversation, but we also need silence. Indeed, writer Deepak Chopra has said we all need to take time for silence every day. Writer Alan Watts alluded to the idea of withdrawal and return. He said in his own life he found it enjoyable to withdraw from people, to experience solitude, but then again he found it enjoyable to return to people. And again, he believed we needed both solitude and companionship to live fulfilling lives. There is a consensus among the great thinkers that the ability to enjoy solitude is indispensable to a fulfilling life. Again, the ability to enjoy solitude is indispensable to living a fulfilling life. It's a form of self-reliance. Indeed, every child should be taught the importance of enjoying his or her own company. It gives life a sweeter flavor. It should also be pointed out that it's not unusual that some social butterflies are very lonely people, lonely for themselves. It's not unusual that people who are social butterflies are running from themselves and running from their own company. Imagine disliking one's own company. Thoreau put it this way. Henry David Thoreau said, "We are for the most part more lonely when we go abroad among men than when we stay in our own chambers." What do you think? Have you ever felt more lonely when with other people than when alone? Confucius and many other philosophers have pointed out that we ourselves can give ourselves certain things which nobody else can give us. Again, only you yourself, only me, myself, can give ourselves certain things. Others can't do it. Confucius put it this way: what the wise person seeks, he seeks within himself. What the unwise person seeks, he seeks in others. And what can't other people give us? What are some of the things only we ourselves can give us? Self-esteem, meaning self-respect, tranquility, peace of mind. Carl Jung said this: all a man ever has is himself. All a woman ever has is herself. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the most famous of 19th and 20th century, early 20th century feminists, wrote a book entitled The Solitude of Self. Indeed, she gave a very important speech back in the late 1800s entitled The Solitude of Self. And in this speech, she said this. She said, very good connections with other people are the ideal, the exception, not the rule. Again, very good connections with other people are the ideal, the exception, not the rule. She went on to say that loneliness is an inevitable part of the human condition. Loneliness, an inevitable part of the human condition. Elizabeth Cady Stanton contended that yes, we can reduce the degree of loneliness we can experience or do experience in life, but we can never completely eliminate loneliness from our lives. The great thinkers have said that reducing loneliness depends primarily on oneself and not others. That reducing loneliness means engaging the mind, focusing on something, getting in the state of flow, concentrating so much on something that one even forgets that one is alone. Psychiatrists talk about the state of flow in which one is concentrating perhaps on a book or doing a project or cooking, whatever. It could be house cleaning if one is absorbed in one's efforts to clean the house and one is concentrating on that. That can reduce one's loneliness in the sense that one is so focused on something that you even forget you're alone. Also, another prescription the great thinkers offer for helping us to be less lonely, to feel less lonely, is to reduce our self-absorption and increase our interest in other people and increase our service to other people. If we can be less absorbed, less self-absorbed, and more concerned with the welfare of others, that will go a long way to reducing our loneliness. I cannot end my discussion of what a wise person's attitude might be towards other people without talking about a concept which Plato raises in one of his most famous books. Plato introduces the concept of the ring of Gyges. Maybe some of you have heard about it. He tells the story of a lonely shepherd who discovers a dead person and finds that the dead person has what looks like an expensive ring on one of his fingers, and the shepherd removes the ring from the dead body, and he finds that when he puts the ring on one of his own fingers and turns the ring a certain way, he becomes invisible. And what the shepherd proceeds to do is to wear this ring in such a way that he is invisible, and he then proceeds to seduce the queen of the empire. He seduces her, and after seducing her, he kills her husband, the king, and seizes power. And one of the questions Plato raises, again in one of his most famous books, is this: what if each of us could be invisible and do whatever he or she wished, steal, rape, kill, and never be caught? The question Plato is raising, again, is the most important. Indeed, let me phrase it this way. Plato contended the most important question any one of us can ask himself or herself is this: is it in one's selfish interest to be an honest, just person? Again, is it in one's selfish interest to be an honest, just person? And the Platonic Socrates gives this response: justice is best for the soul. The Platonic Socrates goes on to say this: being just helps us to be friends with ourselves. Being just helps us to be friends with ourselves. The American philosopher and writer Ralph Waldo Emerson provides a good summary of what Plato and Socrates are talking about. Emerson put it this way. He said, "There is in the soul of man a justice whose judgments are instant." He goes on to say that he who does a good deed is instantly ennobled. Again, he who does a noble deed is, he who does a good deed is instantly ennobled, whereby he who does a mean deed is by that action instantly diminished. Aristotle provides illumination concerning this issue. He said that being virtuous in the long run makes us happier. Aristotle's own words. He says happiness is an activity of the soul in conformity with virtue. Happiness is an activity of the soul in conformity with virtue. It is interesting to me that several hundred years before Jesus, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle all used the word soul, and all often talked about in their writings the soul and the consequences of our actions. The idea that when we act well, when we act justly, we will be rewarded, and that when we act unjustly, we will be punished. In this life, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle believed that we would be punished in this life for our lack of goodness. It is also interesting that Confucianism, which is regarded by some as a religion, and Buddhism, neither of which preaches the existence of a personal God, both echo that idea. Again, Confucianism and Buddhism both teach that we will be punished in this life for any unjust actions. They claim, these two religions, philosophies, if you will, claim that it's human psychology, that even if there's no God, even if there's no heaven, it's in our selfish interest to be just. What do you think? Psychiatrist M. Scott Peck went even further than some of these thinkers. Peck claimed that we grow emotionally, we grow psychologically by fighting the evil in the world around us. His own words now. Our personal involvement in the fight against evil in the world is one of the ways we grow. Might it also be true that we regress emotionally, we regress psychologically when we promote evil in the world? I have a couple of minutes remaining, and I wish to do something I haven't had the time to do in the past 12 programs I've done on the theme of wisdom, and that is to recommend some books to you that you might be helpful in pursuing this theme. First, I want to recommend a book to you, which is a book about the wisdom books. It's a book that tells you about the great books that have been written in the English language, and advises you again about which writers you might find the most helpful in pursuing the subject of wisdom. And again, the book I'm recommending is a book called The Western Canon by Harold Bloom. The Western Canon by Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom is an octogenarian who teaches at both Yale and New York University. And this book, again entitled The Western Canon, The Western Canon is a guide to the great books. So if you're looking for help in trying to determine which books you should read, this is a great book to start with. Professor Bloom claims that the two greatest writers in the Western tradition have been Shakespeare and Plato. He claims they are the greatest of wisdom writers. Let me begin with his recommendations concerning Plato. He believes that among Plato's greatest works are the Apology, which is a book about Socrates' trial. You recall Socrates was Plato's teacher. And in this book, entitled The Apology, and it's a very short book, Socrates and Plato talk about what might be a wise person's attitude towards life. Again, the name of the book is The Apology, a very short book by Plato. Another book he highly recommends by Plato is a book called The Republic. It's Plato's idea of what the ideal society would be like. What would the educational system be like? What would the socioeconomic system be like in the ideal society? What would the status of religion be in the ideal society? Again, the name of the book is The Republic. And another book he highly recommends by Plato is a book called The Symposium. Again, a very short work. And The Symposium is Plato's masterpiece concerning love. Again, I highly recommend it to you. Again, I'm running short on time now, so I'll have to wait until next week to provide some further recommendations, specifically concerning some plays by Shakespeare, but also concerning some works by many other writers. Finally, I wish to conclude, as I usually do, with a quote from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau said this: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."